Welcome to the new demo. I'm going to start this figure painting today, and in the first session I will be doing blocking and filling the big shapes first, and we will talk about how to prepare for rendering, because the first part is, I consider it as a preparation for the most important, for the second part of this painting, when we will talk about importance of halftones and how to render the skin, and actually any form, but mostly the skin, using halftones, and how to make skin look beautiful, and how to create effect of translucency in the skin and glowing effect as well. Okay, anyhow, the panel is about 40 by 60 centimeters, not big, not small, something in between. There is a tone. As you can see, it is quite unusual. I was using like different pigments to tone the canvas, and we have more reds in the bottom parts and just raw umber and yellow ochre in the top part. Some sort of experimental type of toning. And I did transfer of the drawing using standard transfer method, which I assume you did as well before you begin this paint along. For transferring I was using Van Dyke Brown, but now, as I can see it, I would say just raw umber will be probably better, because it will be not so contrast. But anyhow, we have the transfer, we have the tone. Another thing to keep in mind, if you just did the transfer 20 minutes ago, I recommend you to wait a little bit longer. I did it yesterday, so everything is totally dry, because I'm going to paint over it. I'm going to use a lean medium, which can just dissolve the lines if they are not properly dry, so be advised. So as usual, I start with the shadows. The medium which I'm going to use is mixture of Galkit Light and Mineral Spirits. So Gamsol and Galkit Light 50-50. I'm going to paint very thinly, because for me the most important part is just to create the optical representation of the whole thing first, because as I said, we're going to focus a lot on these areas in the next session, and I need to prepare for it. So I use a bit of medium. As you can see, I've mixed some umbers first, transparent red oxide, a bit of green. This is the burnt umber and this is the raw umber. Anyhow, it's just to begin, to start rendering, to start filling the shapes first. Normally, it's the most organic, I would say, and the most natural way of painting, especially when the light source is singular and strong, to start with the shadows, to create the value foundation for our rendering. The ground for the panel is Michael Harding non-absorbent acrylic primer. Which is quite good in my opinion, because the colors, they don't sink in as they will do with normal gesso. Of course, proper oil ground or lead ground is even better, but with the oil ground, especially traditional oil ground without using alkyd, it will take like couple of weeks to dry properly. I mean, like first week for the first layer, and you apply the second layer. So it's not really convenient nowadays when we can just apply this gesso, this ground, in the evening and start painting in the morning, or even like in the morning and a few hours after you carefully can start painting. But normally, I would suggest to wait 24 hours to be sure. The Galkit light is another thing which can help you to avoid sinking in problem, because when it dries, the colors they remain almost the same. And in any case, I've mixed it with Gamsol 50/50, so it will guarantee that everything will dry in a few hours. So the process is straightforward, nothing to really to discuss here. You see, I'm just with a round brush. By the way, it is Ivory Round from Rosemary. With this round brush, I can use it almost like a pencil, using the tip of it for more precise application, and using the side of it like this, or even like that, for filling the big shadow masses, for filling the big areas. The point, as usual, the same as in the previous demo, the point is to work efficiently and fast, not for the sake of speed, but for the sake of effortless look. If your panel is different, like if the size is different, you just need to adjust the drawing, the file which I provided, and print it out accordingly. I do recommend to transfer the drawing for this exercise. Especially, and yeah, like ideally, you do the drawing by yourself, but just for the sake of time, you can use mine. You can also use mine first just to learn and to see how simple drawing can be and could be. So it's for me, it is not about creating beautiful drawing and with little details or some sophisticated design elements or decisions. For me, the drawing here is just a placeholder. So I want to arrange the big shapes as intended without making mistakes. So I will not have to fix the design later, lest it will just be very long process. And like if I want to work freehand the figure to work from the brush right away, I will definitely use bigger canvas. So for the smaller panels or for the smaller details or smaller elements, the transferring of the drawing can help a lot. But mostly we do it for educational purposes. So I will record and demonstrate different methods. So I will constantly be switching between freehand, especially when it comes to the heads and alla primas, to more detailed, more tight rendering using transfer of drawing and some other techniques. For really big piece, let's say more than 1 meter on the long side, the projecting of the drawing will be more efficient. But for medium and small sizes, I found that the transferring is the best way. If you do your drawings, and I highly recommend to draw traditionally, like with charcoal or with pencil first, the same size, and after you transfer the drawing, like using transfer paper or scanning it and printing out the same way as we do. So like this is the best way of preparing for the painting, because when you do the drawing, it's not just about like likeness or accuracy. It is also like decision-making process. So before you even start painting, you analyze everything. You analyze your reference, you analyze the shapes, you make your decisions like concerning composition and other things. So you come prepared somehow for what is going to happen, because we really want to create beautiful painting. With experience, it will be easier to draw with a brush, with the big shapes. But if you struggle with drawing, or not just struggle, if drawing is still the issue and it is in the stage of development, making drawing first and paint later can help you to separate the tasks, to deal with problems one by one. So I continue with a shadow mixture. And you see, like here in this part of the drawing, I didn't even bother myself with designing the end of the hair, because I want somehow gradually fill it with a shadow first, so I will be able to paint the hair with a lighter mixture later. So when I squint, I see that it is very fluid area. So it's some sort of, it's like a waterfall. The water is coming down and it's getting darker and darker in this part. So I can do the same now. I can just fill everything with generic shadow mixture first and figure out what to do with the hair later. Because hair is going to be something which is on top. It is why I want to paint it not now but later, on top of the, probably even after I build up the planes in the spine here, in upper spine and the shoulder girdle. So yeah, something like this. And anyhow, here is the shadow. And here as well, I squint my eyes and I see that the hair, even despite it is blonde hair, it is something in between the shadow and the light in the big masses. So I think I will just very thinly, now you can see that I use more medium than shadow mixture. So like here there was more paint, and on top it is very diluted mixture. So I want just to indicate the general value of the hair, ignoring the highlights. It's very transparent, almost like watercolor type of paint application. And using the same brush, I'm just filling the hair in. Because I want it to be slightly darker than the tone of the canvas, of my panel. Otherwise it will be too bright against the background. And as you can see in the reference, the background is quite dark, so we will use the benefits of such dark background to paint the skin, to create luminosity, to create transparency and a sense of life. I use another rosemary brush, Eclipse Comber brush, to soften my shadows and just to distribute everything as thinly as I can. Something like this. Okay. Burnt umber, raw umber, a bit of green, a bit of red. The palette which you can see, I'm not sure if I'm going to use all of those pigments today. It's just what I got on my palette, what I have from working on another painting. But as usual, I have lead white, lead tin yellow, yellow ochre, transparent red oxide, vermilion, alizarin crimson. This magenta is not relevant for today. The same as with this quinacridone. It's not quinacridone, it is dioxazine purple, cobalt violet, cobalt blue, cobalt teal, sap green, viridian, bone black, raw umber and burnt umber. These three and transparent red oxide and also green are going to be useful today. But let's continue. I have the shadows. I feel like here should be slightly more uniformed. So I just go over this shape. And it feels like it is dry already. I'm adding a bit of red into my shadow mixture for the shadow shapes in the face. And I'm just filling these little triangulars I advise to use small brushes, at least for this, because the drawing, it means that we already made all decisions. So I don't want to lose my drawing too fast. And inaccurate shape design can just distract me from evaluating the values. Because reference is one thing, drawing is another thing, and the actual painting is absolutely different thing. Especially when we paint not from life, but from using photograph, like we do today. Here in the knuckles we have really deep dark shadows, so I'm pretty confident. But in the fingers there are some areas of... Oh, by the way, I'm touching the shadow here. I need to bring it back. So I think I will just feel the fingers as well. We can just use more mixture to indicate the darker shadows, like the real shadows, and a bit diluted application, more transparent application, to indicate the halftones. Something like that. Just wipe off the exceeds of the paint from your brush and use the side of it to blend in the pigment, and on top of that again with a thicker mixture, so to have some sort of halftones and shadows relationships in the knuckles and in the fingers here. Okay. So there will be horizon line somewhere here. But I will return to it later. Now I want to... Yeah, completely forgot to finish this. So before it dries, and it is very important, we need to make things look very unified, very flat. And since this medium makes things dry really fast, we need to fill the shapes thoroughly, otherwise there will be disconnection. Okay, so a bit of the medium again. Shadow here, there will be some shadow there as well. And again, if you are not sure, or if the halftones are just dark there, you always can just use the blending methods, blending technique to... Like here, I didn't even draw this shadow, because when we squint we see that the forearm is gradually just getting darker. So we can do the same. Again, we can drag the paint a little bit. So it doesn't have to be like the shadows. They don't have to be extremely flat. I mean, by the shapes. So the edge, you already can just adjust the edge a bit, like in this area, in the elbow area. I'm using the paper towel to fix. And also I think we can just, it's not the final, it's mostly just indication of the value hierarchy, which we are going to follow. Okay, so talking about the tone of the canvas, I could say that I feel like I want the. Let me just quickly tell you my initial idea about it. I feel like I want some golden glow, like the glow of golden light to be here, because the light is falling on the figure. The light is making the figure very bright and luminous. But here in the bottom we have some sort of warm shadows and probably even some kind of reflected light. It is why here the tone is more red, because I want this red to interact with my shadow application, because we are applying the shadow very thinly, very transparently, and this red is shining through. Actually, it is why I prefer to tone my canvas, because on the white canvas I will have to feel the shadows very opaquely to look like shadows. But on the toned canvas we can work in a more subtle way. And by toning and by choosing which value and the color of the tone, we can adjust and we can prepare things for rendering. Okay, the shadows in the figure filled in. We can just erase a bit of it here to match the value, but it's not really important now. What I'm not sure about is the color and the value of the cloth she is holding. But anyhow, first I need to do some shadow. So, but I see that it is colder, obviously. It is colder than the skin shadow, so I will just try to mix something colder. So I'm using Viridian and probably a bit of yellow ochre. Let's add some cobalt violet. Yeah, we can just stay with this mixture for a while. For the time being. It's also, I don't think that it is final decision about the color of the shadow in the cloth. I just need dark shapes to serve as foundation for my pictorial design here. So first just shadows. The only thing which I pay attention now is that the shadow in the cloth is colder, apparently colder than the shadow in the skin. So I will just go for it. I will use this shadow now, this mixture now. And quickly fill in the shadows. I will raise my canvas now a bit, my easel. Sometimes strong color of the tone can help to unify different parts. So my advice is try to experiment with different tonings. It doesn't have to be raw umber every time. It can be some Venetian red or English red, like in Goya's paintings. It can be greens or grays. So normally when I choose the color of the tone of the ground, it is either the color which resembles the color of the shadows, of the most of the shadows, like of the majority of them, or it is complementary. So I will paint the shadows with complementary colors, and it will create the sense of vibrancy in the color. Here it is something like, it is a former, not latter. So the temperature of the shadows is more or less the same as temperature of the ground. I just pushed the ground color to a certain extreme in the bottom part. Again, for the gradation, but here are going to be some greens, and here are going to be some violets. So we will see. Maybe I will swap the violets to the other type of greens. It is another thing which I will just need to figure out. So this the reference image which we are using now is not the final decision. I will prefer to make my final decisions about everything here on the canvas, not in my Photoshop. But sometimes we want to be totally sure. So, but not this time. This time I really like just to play around. The break is over. So now the next step is the background. It is very important to build up the whole thing before we move on. So it's some sort of like first we need to create some very basic representation. Something really like absence of details, but with a true, let's say true to composition, true to representation. Something like just blurred or unfocused like version of the painting we're going to create. And after we will increase the details. I'm mixing some kind of shadow for the, not the shadow, some kind of the background mixture. And I see we have some greens and they look absolutely lovely. So I'm using like mixture of ambers, transparent red oxide and subgreen to create this deep, almost gray, dark green. Before I begin, I will want to test it on the background somewhere in the corner, somewhere here. Okay, it looks good. I think we will just continue with it. So now I use another round brush. It is number 5, size is number 5, Shiraz pointed round, also from Rosemary. Oh, and I'm just trying to make decision about the hatches. We have some options. We can paint things like very flat, using big flat brush, just covering everything with the darks, but it is not my intention here. I want to build up everything gradually, and I highly recommend you to do the same, because you always can add more thickness into the background later. But if you apply your background too opaque and too flat, too thick, it will be not easy to bring it back, the transparency. So, of course, you don't have to paint so many small hatches as I do now. It's just for the sake of for the sake of subtle variety in the background. It's one of the ways of painting the atmosphere with a bit of randomization in the marks making. So with this brush, I'm just feeling the top of my panel, and in the reference there will be we can see that there are some lighter and darker areas. Some areas are more green, some areas are slightly more red. I will search for it later, but I can also add some transparent red oxide into mixture now. And just continue feeling the shadows, the background, Can be very long process, quite meditative. I just don't want to rush and to jump into the area which is next to the skin, next to the figure, because I want some tone of the canvas of the panel to be more visible. So I deliberately try to paint thinly near the figure, near the silhouette. It is why I apply you see, like my brush strokes are very gentle now. I want to create natural gradation. And sometimes it can just make our backgrounds look more interesting. So maybe I want to create the sense of like spherical movement around her. So probably, or we can do an S curves. The hatching is another interesting method. It can be a very powerful tool. One can learn a lot by studying Rembrandt's etchings, for example, or how Anders Zorn was making his etchings. So I assume that the top corners are going to be the darkest. So we're creating some sort of vignette shape here. So I will add more pigment right away. It is also helpful if we want to create delicate painting. So for me, I think it can be more interesting if I apply the background also with a small brush, instead of using a really big flat brush now to evenly paint the background. I will even add a bit of yellow ochre into those greens, transparent red oxide, so I can alter the background now a little bit. And you see now this hair now, it looks lighter than the background. It is why I filled it right away in the first stage, in the first step. Because I knew that the background is very dark, and when I squint my eyes at my reference, I see that the hair is darker than the skin here in the lights, and darker than the skin in the face. It is why we have this gentle tone in the hair right away. So now it is not distracting us from the value relationships, from the proper values. With a Q-tip, I'm just bringing back some tone. And I continue hatching my background. So it can be more unified. For example, we can do like the all strokes. We can make them all diagonals or all verticals, or radiating strokes around the figure, or like following the figure. There are so many ways of painting the background, painting the big shapes using small brushes. So yeah, I recommend you to play around with here. There's no point to do exactly as I do. And I will repeat, this is not the final background. The same as there are no final things. Even the drawing is not final because we will lose it with rendering, and especially in the small areas, and I will have to find it back. It is why actually I didn't care much about the halftones, the small shapes. So transferring of the drawing doesn't mean that we should neglect honing our drawing skill. We shouldn't. We should constantly practicing drawing. In order to find smaller shapes in the halftones and just be confident about what we are doing and how to solve the problems if we encounter any of them. Okay, more subgreen, more burnt umber. I think, yeah. Transparent red oxide. A bit of yellow ochre here and peripheral to make it slightly yellower and lighter. Maybe a bit of black for the corners. And more greens here. Even probably just a bit of this cobalt teal. So now I have, it's not really visible on the screen as I can see. Yeah, but still slightly warmer, slightly colder, so like more red, more green, more yellow. Yellow here. I'm making the camera slightly lighter. Oops, those two. Yeah, and this ground, I mean the Michael Harding primer and the medium which I used, like the combination of these two factors, it is making things dry even faster. So I can just paint over it and you see nothing is really damaging. So I can continue. I switch to smaller brush now for, where it is, this one. For this area around the face. So I can just paint slightly more precisely. Maybe just indication first. So for me, it is all creating just more visual interest in the painting. It looks a bit more artistic in a way. Because from experience I know that monotonous backgrounds can just ruin everything. I was studying old masters a lot, and I've seen examples of such nicely executed backgrounds. There are many, Rembrandt of course, but also Gainsborough. And all portrait painters of 19th and 18th century, for example, French or British. When the formal portrait on the dark background, and the dark background is very thin, very suggestive, sometimes with a suggestion of the landscape, sometimes just some sort of the void, but it looks very atmospheric. And for me it is some sort of holy grail when we can paint something which cannot be painted, like a mood, emotion, the light, or the space. So I'm getting closer to filling in the background around the face. I don't want to rush, to be honest. So maybe just a bit of ochre. Dilute it again with my medium. So when we paint on such a dark background, or if we want background to be as dark as in our reference, it is quite natural to leave the lightest shapes for later. It's like it is why we need to tone the canvas so the lightest shapes will be not as bright as the white, because with the white canvas it will be impossible now to paint this way. Everything will just shine through and it will be quite annoying and uncomfortable to build up such transparent thing. So again, like returning to the toning, and I hope it is clear now why it is important. I choose the tone according to the temperature of the shadows, or in some cases it can be complementary to the shadow color. And the value of the tone should more or less match the value of the lighter halftones in the lighter areas. So for us, like when we squint our eyes, yes, we ignore the cloth because cloth is not so important here. So cloth is going to be the lightest light, at least here, and maybe this part. But in general, the lightest planes, the lightest shapes, sorry, are the face, the shoulder here, this area here, the upper arms, yeah, and the lower part of the body, the pelvic structure and the gluteus maximus here. So they are going to be the lightest areas. And it is why the tone of the canvas should match the value of like the general lighter areas. If it is too dark, it will not work because now it is already working. It is serving as a lighter halftone. If it is too light, it will be too bright, so the relationships, the value relationships will be broken. Now with a clean brush, by clean I just mean I wiped off what was on the brush, but without rinsing in the mineral spirits in Gamsol, because I don't want to affect, to dilute the background. So with a kind of a clean brush, I'm just making things slightly more unified. We can even, scumble a bit. So the whole idea is to keep things transparent. Now I can add some darks in the top corners to see how my idea of glowing background will work. Yeah, I think it will. And as I said before, we always can mix opaque mixture and just cover everything in the background if we need to. This is the easiest part. So I can just create some sort of weave here. The horizon will be there. And now you see this transparent application of the background will start to interact with the color of the tone. So the background will start to change, even despite I will be using the same almost the same, just dark brown, kind of a greenish brown mixture. So as you can see, I basically don't really care about matching any colors in the background. First, because there are no certain colors, everything is rather just kind of a texturized void. But also because it is not important now. The only thing which is important is the value, transparency, and temperature to a certain degree. Here the background is already starting to sink in. So it will dry in some sort of velvety look, but not as desaturated as if I was just using the Gamsol. So let's mix a bit more of it. I record this demo in the normal speed, so we will have real-time recording. Maybe some parts, some later parts of this demo I will record. They will be like sped up, we will see. But I wanted to record and edit paint along experience this time. It is why I will just paint and talk. although sometimes there are not so many things to tell, like here, just continuing. So if you feel like you want to just to watch and listen without painting along, feel free to increase the speed or just to jump to next chapter or to fast forward it. And if you paint along, if you follow the same steps as I do, it doesn't mean that you have to do it at with the same speed, I would say. Sometimes to slow down is better. So don't worry if some things take longer time for you. It is not about the speed. The same with the texture can be done. Probably, maybe I should have just go with a smaller brush and paint it like 3 times slower, but with more interesting look. I need more green. Okay. So now I'm raising the panel a bit. And I continue doing the same. Decided to add a bit of medium. When it comes to filling the big shapes using like small brush or things like that, like when I do what I do now, normally I have some idea in mind how I want to hatch things, how I want to build things, but I know that it is going to be anyhow. It is going to be accordingly to my current state of mind or to my personality. So I recommend you to lose up a little bit in easy areas and just follow the flow, follow the how you feel it. Try to find your own way of applying paint, because it will lead you eventually to galvanization of your personal style. Nothing is going to look the same when people work in their own style somehow, following their feelings or just their personality. In general, it is just decision making and design of the shapes, or also like mixing habits and the way how we perceive, how we see the color, because it is different from person to person. But also there is also like how we hedge, which brushes do we use, and how we apply our micro decisions, these little movements of our bodies that will determine the look of the painting. And also the ability to loosen up is also very important for painter. Okay, so now I'm reaching the point of the suggested horizon line. I will apply it later, probably even not in this session, I mean the horizon line, because when I was designing this composition I thought about using cobalt teal, kind of a little shape, tiny shape of teal color in the background. So now probably it will be just enough to indicate where it will be without bothering with actual application. In the reference, the value of this shape in between the spine and the arm is darker, or like the same value as the darkest shadow here in the latissimus dorsi muscle, but I think I will not make it as dark. Maybe I will keep this, the background, the sky, slightly lighter to respect the atmospheric perspective. So I want the glow to be here as intended, because the top part of her body, this top part receives more light, and the light is gradually getting weaker down when it goes down. So it is why I will paint darker background here near the forearm and the rib cage to respect this initial idea. And also trying to slightly design the gradation in the background as well. Here you can see now how severely the foreshortening is like distorting the view of the painting, the proportions, I would say. Everything looks more elongated. So keep in mind, every time you watch my recording, the proportions, they are not exactly the same as you see them. So But now, today, it is not, everything is, it is not important, I would say. Just funny how the horizon line moves on the screen. So the bottom part of the background is darker and slightly different color. Some sort of purplish thing. I'm not sure about this dark purple, to be honest, but I will definitely use just more greens, at least now. Maybe a bit of alizarin into this mixture. And I think maybe the hatches should go horizontally. At least we can try. Just a bit of cobalt violet into it. Yeah, I think it's, at this point it is enough. But what I see here in the reference that the background should be slightly lighter than the shadow in the skin. So even despite, like, I know that the shadow in the thigh will be darker when I paint over it later, but I want to respect those relationships. So now I'm just spreading the dark of the background here to make it slightly lighter. After some consideration, I've decided to add the blue. So cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, yeah. So you see, like, finally I've decided to use the blue primary here. To make it slightly lighter, I will use yellow ochre, and I'm going to revisit the area. The main point of what I'm doing now is I don't want to leave any shape like without decision about, without making it following value hierarchy. So things which should appear dark, they're going to be dark. Things which are going to be light, they will be light. What is happening inside, or like small details or colors or gradations, they are not important. But the main general hierarchy of values is the paramount. Because I don't want to bother myself with it later. If I leave some areas unpainted or just unfinished, it will affect my perception of the composition. So it will be more difficult for me to concentrate on smaller things, on subtle details, on small shapes, and so on. And as I said, it is all about the value. So we can make decisions about color later, but the value should be established. It is also helping to see the reference on the very small scale, like on the screen now. This tiny little thumbnail which helps us to see things as they intended to be from the point of view of value hierarchy. So for horizon line, for this little lighter shape there, I will just leave the unpainted elements, like a bit of canvas, a bit of panel shining through. It is enough at this point. But for example, this part must be darker. So I'm just jumping into this area because the background is already starting to dry. So I need to finish it as soon as I can. By finish, I mean just to fill everything. So it will look as dark or quite dark, let's say, closer to the reference. But I don't forget about my intention, about the glow. It is why I feel more comfortable, more free, let's say, more relaxed in the peripheral parts of the background when I know that things are going to be dark anyway. If you feel like your brush application, it is dragging the previous layers and in some unpleasant way it means that we have to stop. I already starting to notice it here, so I will just add some darks here. Yep. Okay. The second break. Okay, the break is over. Let's continue. With a fan brush, I'm trying to just to knock down some brush strokes, you know, gently moving things around, just softening. But it seems like even in the 5 minutes, after 5 minutes, everything is so dry, which is good. So this is another way of working when you want to paint fast. Like, for example, you want to do this stage today and to do the second stage tomorrow. It is when you need to use such paint application and such mediums to ensure that everything will be ready tomorrow to continue. But it also means that you should avoid using white in any mixtures, because even lead white will take some time to dry. But earth pigments, like I'm using now, they dry pretty fast. But still, you see, like with a Q-tip, I can erase some parts, so I can fix the problem if there are any problems. Okay, so softening with a sable brush. This one is very old, round sable. You see, it doesn't work as it intended to do, but I don't throw it away because it is still very good at blending, and it is really good for softening things. Okay, so let's have a look. The drawing is good. I like it. I mean, not drawing is good, of course, because we transferred it. I mean, the value structure, the hierarchy of values is working. The background works, in my opinion. Yes, there are some areas which are not really, let's say, nicely done. Like this one I like more than left part. But since I'm going to paint over it anyhow, I don't worry a lot, I don't worry much. So we can always just soften things. Yeah. Notice how the background is more noisy and more texturized if we compare it with the shadows in the skin, and it is deliberate, because in the skin I'm going to paint over with different probably darks and scumblings for the reflected lights, all such things, and I don't want the shadow in the skin to be like very randomized, because it will probably, in the area which I need it to be darker, it will be too bright, or there will be some gaps between the strokes, and I will have to repaint everything. I will have to cover it opaquely in order to control tiny little shapes and values of them. So when I know that the rendering will be very tight and precise, I try to paint my shadows like this initial underpainting shadows. I want to make them very unified and very soft and like flat. But here in the background, I know that everything is going to be a little bit noisy, a little bit, randomized. So it is why I prefer to do it from the start. And also it helps me to see now how the piece will be composed, how I am going to separate different areas of the painting, different elements of my composition. Here will be the light, here will be the thickness also. Here are going to be the shadows and like transparent flat look of the shadows. The background is going to be more transitionally texturized and noisy. And that part of the background, some sort of the sea and the horizon, is going to be more flat again and darker. So like now it starts to appear, and I kind of like it. So what to do next? Because we did already all the darks, and now we can say that it starts to emerge. Now I think I should indicate some colors and the values in the cloth. When I squint, I see like this triangular shape is brighter than that triangular shape. Both are quite light compared to the background. Now I take King's Blue, Yellow Ochre, and since we already introduced some violets, Cobalt Violet, and maybe Viridian, and a bit of Ivory Black. So since I know that the lightest part here is going to be applied later with a thickness, I don't worry much about matching this value now. But I need to show to myself and to indicate my intention here, because I don't want to leave it just mid-value red. What about a bit of Latin yellow for the lightest part? So, and it looks a bit cold, so it will match more or less the temperature. And it is all. I don't really need to bother myself with the actual color, because I'm going to do some impastos in the very end. So we will start from here. This mixture is already using some longer, let's say the pigments I was using here for this mixture, they will take a longer time to dry. It is why it is very important to apply this mixture very thinly, so it will dry with the same speed or almost the same speed as the rest. Because if, let's say, you want to continue next day and some areas, let's say the cloth is still not entirely dry, you just don't work there, you work in the rest of it. But ideally we want it to be as dry as the rest, because everything is just underpainting here. So I'm just hatching those lights. Yeah, the red will still be visible, which is not so bad. because it will continue to unify everything. And I like this kind of old mastery look of this area, very traditional with a red tone. Why not? So my goal is just, as I said before the break, is just to establish the value hierarchy, keeping everything in place. Maybe a bit of King's Blue, Cobalt Violet. Medium. The folds I drew are very generic and suggestive. We just need some difference between the shadows and the lights, but it's all. I prefer to leave this area to the very end, because the cloth here is just a supporting element of the composition. So probably I will want it to be lighter or darker in order to help overall perception of the piece. We will see. It also means that a lot of decisions are being made during the drawing stage, when you compose everything and when you prepare the drawing. Some decisions we have to make during this stage, when we fill the underpainting, when we block things in, but the final decisions, sometimes very unexpected ones, we will make them in the very end or during the second part. The second part is going to be the longest part. The rendering of the halftones, all the scumblings and things. Okay, and now I also can revisit the shadows. My initial shadows I've painted in the beginning, they look now too bright, so they don't match the hierarchy, they don't respect it, and we need to make them darker. Cobalt Violet. And raw amber. They're going to be some sort of complementaries, violet and yellow. Because raw amber is, I consider it as yellow. And burnt umber is red. Very desaturated both, of course, and depends on brand. So some manufacturers Their umbers, they look a little bit different from others. It is why I don't like any kind of experimentation with umbers. My favorites are Old Holland, and if anything else, I will choose Rublev or Michael Harding. But for some reason, Old Holland, in my opinion, they're making really nice, beautiful umbers. But it's personal. Some umbers, they just look too green or too bland, I would say, very desaturated, grayish. And when they dry, they look lifeless. So I would say I don't really need to push the cloth more. Yes, there is this reddish undertone shining through. It is not affecting the value structure anymore, so I will just leave it as it is for now. So we've got the shadows, the background, the cloth. Now I want to, okay. Before I feel the skin, I want to indicate some additional values in the hair. The hair looks too transparent now, too flat, too empty. It is not the painting of the hair per se, it is just indication of the values, because as I said in the beginning, the hair will be painted in the very end. But I need to just to add some variety now to the values. So probably just a bit of dark here. Slightly darker here. The top also a bit darker. And with a blending brush, I'm just creating some sort of the movement. Maybe I will just paint with it a bit, like here. So I consider it as underpainting for the hair. Mostly just to help myself to see things slightly more established, a bit more finished. Nothing really Nothing is really settled or finished here, just a bunch of brush strokes to set up things. The blonde hair is very interesting subject to paint, so we're going to talk about it next time. So for now it's something like this, no more. And now I can also see that probably I want to just to pick up some background. The Q-tip. And soften everything here. So you see, I want to maintain this glow, this effect, even in underpainting. Okay, so now we are going to do the skin, and it's going to be the last thing we need to do today, because I don't want to leave this, especially in the second, in the lower part. I don't want to leave this infernal looking dark red. So first we want to mix. Like I will start from this area and I will move up, because as I said, in the upper part it is very close to what we need, so I don't really have to worry about it. But the lower part I will probably paint the underpainting first. So burnt umber, a bit of yellow ochre, a bit of green, the medium again. The brush is the same. Now I'm checking it here, it is too dark, so I'm adding a bit of ochre and a bit of Latin yellow as well. But you see how drastically light it becomes? So yeah, maybe something like this. Again, it is not about accurate color, and there are so many of different, subtle changes of colors and values in the halftones. There will be greener, more red things. There will be more yellow things. So I add a bit of vermilion into the mixture, because, like, at least now when I paint over such strong red, this halftone, it appears to be too green. But I think with more application, it will change. But anyhow, I'm adding a bit of transparent red oxide as well. And I think, again, the Latin yellow. So we have some sort of generic pale orange mixture here. And I just want to feel the thigh, ignoring the actual design of the planes. Is just, I think about the cylinders now, so it is some sort of cylindrical logic here, and I just want to follow the form, maybe even with a cylindrical hatches, but it is not really, it is not so important now. Adding a bit of green into the transitional halftone here, just to see how will it serve. A bit of ochre. More Latin yellow, more red for this part, the lightest part of this thigh here. I squint my eyes now quite often because I don't want this thigh to be too bright, too light. I don't want it to compete with the top of gluteus maximus, for example. So just a bit of gradation here near transitional halftone. Yeah, something like that. Okay. With the same pile, I will just try to add adding a bit of transparent red oxide into the fingers. I want to indicate some lighter halftones, darker halftones, sorry, there, but they are too small, the shapes are too small to be really important now, so just blending everything one into each other. Okay, so we have this value here. I squint my eyes and I can say that the value here in the wrist until this part is going to be the same. So I just use the same mixture, almost. I add a bit of transparent red oxide, a bit of green and a bit of umber, and I just filling in the halftones. So basically what we do now is just painting by numbers. We are filling in the shapes. Here as well. And when I make decisions about like values and other things, it's not like absolute values. So I'm not really trying to match the values. I just want them to follow the logic in general. So the shadows are darker than the halftones, and the halftones themselves are quite dark here in the arm area. And the background will be darker around the arm as well, so I can try, we'll see, to add some, yeah, it works. I'm carefully adding some darks around the arm and the wrist. So you see, it's kind of now it's already balancing different values. And it is very important exercise because it teaches us, while learning how to respect the value design, value hierarchy. We don't have to do it all the time. Sometimes when I paint the head or the figure, if the background is dark but I don't want it to be dark, I can paint it on the lighter background. It's more difficult than just to follow the value structure as we see it, but with experience you can just control the values in your focal point, keeping the form intact and the general logic of the form. So it can be, you can alter many things as you go, especially it works nicely in alla prima painting. But here in this exercise, in this particular painting, I want to focus on the design, on the value design of the picture in general, because I'm going to create the painting. It's not just a study of the figure. I want to establish certain mood and certain feeling to it. Needless to say, some narrative. If I'm lucky enough. So you see, like, decision I've made about the values in the hand led me to re-evaluate my background value, at least in this area. And there's another reason why we shouldn't worry about details today. Because imagine if I just was carried away and I was painting the face or even worse, like this part for a few hours without establishing the background and other big masses, big shapes, to realize next day that the values in general are too light or too dark, and I have to repaint or glaze over or scumble things in to fix the value hierarchy which was broken in the first place. When we don't really when we don't invest into the details early, when we can just focus on the big representational structure first, it's just easier and faster and more efficient. And by efficiency, I don't mean only the time or materials we spend. It will be obvious, it will be evident in the painting. So-called effortless look is depending on the decisions we are making and on the priorities we follow during the process, the priorities we choose to respect first. So for me, the generalities are always more important, at least in the beginning, but in the end as well, than particular things. Okay, here I see that it is dragging the previous layer, so it was not ready to paint over. Anyhow, now it is way more correct. I mean, the relationships between these parts, for example, and I can also remix some shadow, the darkest shadow mixture to quickly make the shadow in the knuckles a bit darker. Okay, let's continue now. The green, this green color, which is a result of transparent application of neutral yellows over very bright reds, shouldn't concern us, because the colors will be our focus in the next session, colors and the halftones. But if we just indicate a bit like temperature shifts, slightly colder mixture near the lights and a bit warmer and sometimes colder again, but more saturated in the halftones, in the darker halftones, it will help. And I also want to add some reds into the areas which are going to be, which will have some pinks. So you see, I don't rely on my tone for that, because the skin in the light is going to be painted very opaquely with a lot of paint. Now I just want to, I want to knock down, to compensate, and to get rid of this infernal reds in the skin. But still it will affect, especially in the shadows later. A bit of raw umber and yellow ochre. And again, with the same brush, I'm just hatching and dragging the paint around. We can indicate some transitional shift here. Halftones. But they're not the real ones. It's just for the edge. So what I do now is some sort of It is a hybrid of Ebosh and Grisaille and Brunei even, so it's some sort of everything at once and like in between. Usually I just go with Brunei. It's like when we paint with raw umber first, some sort of tonal drawing with raw umber and applying colors later. Especially, at least raw umber in the shadows and the colors and more variety in the colors in the lights and in the halftones. So normally I go for it. Very seldom I use Grisaille technique. If tone was more, let's say, more neutral, more traditional, just kind of umber or gray, I will do normal Ebosh, like just colorful, saturated indications of the different big shapes with the local colors, with rendering on top. But since here at least I am painting over strong red background, I already kind of sculpting some sort of grisaille, so it is a bit of slightly more opaque than I will do without the red tone, because I want to get rid of it, but not entirely. You can see how it is shining through, again unifying everything. So now with the gluteus maximus, with the sacrum area here, I've established some sort of the lightest halftones in the lower part, in the pelvic structure. Now I want to move up and here in oblique muscles here, for example, we clearly see the halftones are darker, and also they're just more olive type of color, some sort of greenish yellow browns, I would say. So again, without trying to match anything except for general value structure, I'm just adding transparently the mixture which has yellow ochre and raw umber. When you are not sure about what to use, when in doubt, just use raw umber. Surprisingly, it helps a lot. Quite unique pigment, I would say, for the skin. A bit brighter halftone here in between the rectus spinae muscles. So we can already think about the cylinder logic here. Slightly darker area here where where we see the not only cast shadow but also terminator line here. And now we can revisit this shadow here in the latissimus dorsi muscle area. Just need to make it darker. So everything now is about just feeling these reds, covering with them. With just neutral yellow, pale yellow mixtures of the halftones. Now in the arm, in the elbow area. Unifying, because I want to focus on the relationships between the big things. So like the spine goes inside, but here erector spinae muscles and the latissimus dorsi, they are creating certain bump which shows itself through the lighter value. But here it is getting inside again. With a bit of Latin yellow, I can add some light here in the sacrum. Because there is also certain bump. And here as well, in the gluteus maximus muscle, the lightest light. But again, very thinly and very flat. If you don't have Latin yellow, just mix white with cadmium lemon pale, cadmium yellow pale, or cadmium lemon. There is also nickel titanium pigment, which works almost the same. Okay, now here the spine. when the red disappeared. And by the way, if you are just using, if you are not painting on the such strange tone as I do, like let's say just raw umber, I recommend to do just raw umber, of course. But if in case if you want to play same game as I do now, when the red is over, when we have just raw umber in the top area, it will be just very fast because we don't have to paint things really opaquely. But even what I do here is not entirely opaquely. It's like, I will say it's semi-transparent now. You see, I'm just redistributing and moving this paint around, dragging it with a brush. And I don't want to leave any strange looking edges to dry. So I'm softening everything here, as you can see. Yeah, before I move up, I want to, oops. I want to feel the lights here in the fingers. Not such a big deal, but we shouldn't leave it red. So it is not like truly affecting everything, but still looks a bit dramatic. Yeah, just like that, that's enough. And also you see, like now we have this kind of hierarchy, variety in values between like this wrist and that one. One is darker, one is lighter. The plane here is catching more light, the same as the cloth. But the cloth will be, I will make it lighter later. So now we have this sort of special relationships between different parts of the body, and those relationships, they are described by different values. And it is one of the most important things when you paint a figure under the strong light, to show the gradation of the light, to show that, or to show how different planes are situated differently according to the light source. Like here, the triceps area and the upper arm is receiving more light than this because the forearm is just turning away from the light source. And it is how we can quickly create believable looking figure just by following this value structure. Okay, so now I want to make the whole upper arm, starting from the elbow, slightly darker. You see, just transparently applying some darker shapes, and at the same time revisiting the forearm shadow here. See how much it is, like how drastically it can change when we have values established properly. What was deemed as dark shadow areas in the beginning now look like really light halftones. With a blending brush, I just create softer gradation. So you see, like hatches can be also achieved this way, just using such brush. Sometimes it's just a lot of micro movements with a tiny round brush, and sometimes it is just dragging the wet mixture across the form. Yeah, we can also just add a bit of more proper halftone here, but probably it is not really needed now. Yeah, this will be enough. Okay, so now this here, just slightly darker. The upper arm a bit lighter than the chest, so a bit of Latin yellow in the mixture, not as bright. So you see, it's like myself, I'm quite relaxed about the halftones in the light now. It's mostly to prepare myself for rendering next day. And I see in my reference that here near the elbow and around the wrist there are some reddish skin tones. So now I can start to control this red appearance just to make it to shine through slightly more in the forearms and near the elbows. It can just create this natural representation of the reds in the skin. Anyhow, we need to learn how to paint through this stage when things they look a little bit weird. When thin paint application is just not looking exactly like it should because of the tone, or if colors are not saturated enough or oversaturated. It's also very It happens very often when we paint on copper. I discussed it in one of previous tutorials. That initial layer, the first layer, when we paint on the copper, looks very strange because this bronze, this copper color, this type of very strange pinkish metal, it is affecting so much the colors in the beginning. So we just need to continue and don't to worry about it. Just not to worry about it, and it's all. It will be way better in the second layer because we know that the thing will dry, and we will just apply more paint. So a bit of lighter mixture here because we want to claim that the value in the forearm, in the upper arm, sorry, will be brighter. So just lighter. Good. I also want to paint over the line, the outline here, because it is going to be very tiny, narrow shadow. But this shadow is very important for cylindrical logic of the upper arm. Without it, even with the properly rendered halftones, it will still look quite flat. So that's why I'm just painting over the outline, the silhouette line here. I can fix the drawing later with a background, but now I want this. I want to establish the shadow. Yeah, and at the same time we have very light background there. So we can just revisit it with some greens. Why greens? To separate them from the skin, from the shadow of the skin. Yeah, even like that is already much better, in my opinion. And the same is here. I want to make it cleaner somehow. Okay. A bit of lighter hatches here in the spine to maintain the general anatomical structure. Slightly more yellow in the rib cage, in the breast, and now finally we can move up into the shoulder girdle. So on top it is quite straightforward. Just few transparent hatches to unify, to harmonize everything. Because we don't really, as I said before, we don't really need to change the value there. The value and the color are almost the same as we need to begin our rendering, but we need to maintain the integrity of the underpainting. So I prefer to add some transparent brush strokes everywhere, so everything will be at the same level of paint thickness, I would say. We can add some yellows in the hair, for example. Some slightly lighter yellow pinkish, so it is Latin yellow and a bit of alizarin in this part, in the lightest part, just above the shoulder blade, and here in the deltoid muscle. And I think the same mixture will go in the skin of the face with a bit of reds here. Before I finish, I want to, like here probably, this one. I just want to make more straight looking horizon, but now on the video you don't really see how straight it is or not straight, because it is very tilted, distorted. And I will work with it later. I will show you how to paint. There are many ways to paint straight lines or straight elements, but I will show how I will do this particular horizon line. So, well, technically we are in the end of the first stage. So as usual, I want to soften things, and when I drag the paint I try to respect the form, so I do it across the form. This is already dry, this is dry, everything is dry. So this panel will be ready to paint on tomorrow. So like I can continue working on it tomorrow, and I'm really happy about it, because sometimes we can wait. It is okay when, you know, when the painting dries for a few days or weeks or something like that, and we can say, okay, it happens, such is life. We will wait. We will work on it later. But sometimes we need to paint. We need to know, for example, if you have commission or certain deadline, like you are preparing piece for the show or several pieces, and you need to be sure that you can make it in time. You cannot just rely on things which you, for example, don't know about. So if you need it to dry tomorrow, you just use mediums, you paint thinner, you use certain pigments, and you avoid using long drying pigments. So you can continue tomorrow, and after you can continue day after tomorrow, and there is the possibility that you can finish piece which is going to take some layers to paint in the matter of a week. So in a few days the piece will be ready. But it is not always the goal, of course. Okay, so this is it. This is what we needed to do today. Just filling everything, building up the value hierarchy, the structure, the composition, and pictorial design of this figure painting. So I hope it was helpful, and I will show you what will happen next in the next video.